So let's get started on part 2 of this DIY tutorial on making a wood sign. So now the very first thing that I like to start out with is my wood. And this happens to be a piece that is 30 inches long by 10.5 inches wide. And I am going to put it off to the side because the very first thing I want to do is we always want to make sure that we have got our workspace covered anytime we are working with epoxy. And now I am using a marine epoxy, and it is the tabletop epoxy, and I'll put the links down below for it. And it is part A and part B. And you always want to make sure that you are mixing equal amounts of your epoxy. For this first layer that we're going to do, we are just going to do a small amount of epoxy. You always want to make sure you're wearing rubber gloves whenever you're dealing with epoxy. So make sure your space is covered and you've got your gloves on. And once I have my gloves on, I am actually going to pour. Now these little cups have a measure on them, and I am going to measure equal amounts on them, and I will put the measurements down below for you guys. So I've done part A, and now I'm going to do part B. Now I buy my epoxy in the 2-quart size. You can definitely buy smaller sizes of epoxy, but I seem to use it on quite a few different projects. So now what we're going to do is we need to mix our epoxy. And when you do that, you want to pour that into another cup. I never mix in one of the same cups I've poured into. And so I'm going to go ahead and take my first part, and I like to use these, I call them popsicle sticks, to get all of the epoxy part A out of the little plastic measuring cup, and I have it into a clean white cup. And then I am going to go do the same with part B. And you want to make sure you get it all out because you took the time to measure the same amount. So you definitely want to make sure that you have it all out there. Now I got a little spot on my table and or even on my paper, and I'm going to put my wood there. So I go ahead and take a paper towel and cover that up. So I'm just slowly going to mix this, and you want to mix it for a good 2 minutes. And so while it is mixing, what you're looking for is you do not want a lot of air bubbles. And once it gets mixed, it's really going to look clear to you. And so you just take your time and get it all nice and mixed. And so I'm going to fast forward through this, and then we will put it onto our board. Okay, so I have it all mixed up, and now I'm going to make sure I don't have any epoxy laying on my workspace, which you can see I had a little spot there. So I just covered it with a paper towel, and now I'm going to bring my board in, and I want to decide what side I'm going to do the design on and how I'm going to lay it. Now this piece of wood has got a really cool piece of bark on one side of it. So I wanted to make sure I had that at the bottom of my design. And so now what I'm going to do with my epoxy is I am going to take it and I'm just going to pour it. Now the reason why we're doing this layer of epoxy, it is a very thin layer of epoxy, is I have found that the vinyl just adheres so nice to the epoxy. So it's just another way to make sure your vinyl is going to stick really well. And then I've picked up these really inexpensive paintbrushes, and I have found that this is a nice way to get an even coat of that epoxy spread over the board. And so this is what I'm doing, is I'm just working this across the entire board, and you want to make sure you fill in all the spots. We're going to give it a second layer of epoxy after we get our vinyl on, but right now we just want to get a good even coat of epoxy. And you can see, yeah, there I'm covering up that one spot right there. I'm also going to go ahead and go around the edges and just make sure that we've got that. And you want to make sure, I've got a little piece of a strand of the paintbrush has come off, and so you want to take the time to look and make sure no dust, or well, dust you might not see, but hair or little remnants. I've been doing a lot of sewing lately in my craft room, and so sometimes I've got threads around. So you just really want to check the board, and I'm just giving it a nice even coat. Now we're going to need to let this dry overnight. That is the one downfall of the epoxy. It does spread out your project, but I'll tell you, in the end, it is so worth it. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish making sure I'm totally covered here. Now, the next step I'm going to have for you guys is we are going to have our design and we're going to weed it. And if you did not see part 1, that's where we showed you how to size your design. So make sure you check out part 1, and now we'll move to part 2.
Okay, so our next step now is going to be weeding. Now I've already cut it out on my Cricut, and we went through how we sized it correctly. One thing I wanted to show you guys really quick is the very first step we did is we prepped our board with that first layer of epoxy. And again, the reason why we did that is it really adheres really well with the vinyl that we're going to add on. So I'm going to go ahead and weed out my vinyl. And if you guys have seen any of my tutorials before, you guys will know that I absolutely love my pin. And I picked this up from 651 Vinyl. And 651 Vinyl is where I buy the majority of all of my vinyl. And this is the reason why, you guys. Look how beautiful that weeds. It just comes off so nicely. The Cricut Maker cuts it so nice. So it's basically, this pin is basically a pen with a pin at the end of it. And it is perfect for when you are grabbing out all of these little tiny pieces that you need to weed out. So I'm going to go ahead and just weed out these. And then the next step we're going to do is we're going to mark the center of our board so that we can lay out our design. And we're going to put our design on some transfer tape. And I'm going to show you my inexpensive way to do transfer tape. So give me a second here. I'll get this weeded for you guys, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we've got it all weeded, you guys. And I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put the transfer tape on. And I want to show you guys, I am using just peel and stick contact paper that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. And you can get this at Walmart too. It is just one more inexpensive way to transfer your design. Now, I haven't had success in it using it all the time on all things, but I'll tell you it works really well with my boards here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put that on. Okay. And then I'll put the next one on, and I just cut it to size as I need it. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to grab a, no, I'm not going to grab a tape measure. I am going to use my board here because we've already got the measurements we can use right on our board. And we're going to measure to make sure that we're going to put this design on centered. Now, the only way reason you'd want to do that is if you truly want to center your design. I think it looks nice if it's centered. So again, I'm just going to put that there. Got a little too excited there and didn't quite pick up the end. And this is what's so nice about using this contact paper is I am just going to add that right there. So I got that design all covered. And then I'm going to pick up the sippin', grillin', and chillin'. So we'll just go ahead and going to have to piece that one together a little bit, which is no problem. So we're just going to cut. Doesn't have to be perfect, you guys. All we want it on is on the transfer tape. Sometimes it's easiest if you start at the end and then pull it. And then we'll just add one more little bit there. So really nice that you can use contact paper. Like I say, it doesn't work on every design, but I have found since I have been putting that epoxy finish on my wood first, it works really, really nice. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I'm going to grab a burnishing tool, and we are going to varnish that on really well. Okay, so we've got those all done. I'm going to varnish it. I'm not going to pull them off yet, you guys. I want to make sure I know where my designs are going to go. Okay, so what I like to do is I'm going to measure my sign. Now I am sitting on my Cricut board, and this is a 30-inch board. And so what I'm going to do is I like to take a piece of blue tape, and I am just going to mark where my centerpiece is. So I've got a pen here, and 15 inches is right here. Okay, so that way I know that is the center of my board. Okay, so we're going to start, and we're just going to kind of lay this out first. We want to make sure it's all going to fit nice, and it looks like it's going to go great. So what we first want to do is we want to do the welcome. Now I like to just fold mine in half, and you can kind of eyeball where it's at, so I know that that is the middle of my design. Okay, so I can line it right up there. So now what we're going to do is we are going to peel our backing of our 651 vinyl off. Okay, got that peeled off. We're going to place our design. We're going to take our varnishing tool. Okay, and we are going to pull that contact paper right off. You can see how beautiful that just laid down there. No issues whatsoever. I'm going to do the exact same thing with this one. I'm going to eyeball it by folding it in half. Find where my center is. Mark my center. Okay. I'm going to pull off my backing. Okay. And I'm going to place this one. Got my center there. I'm going to come down. And now have that one on. I'm going to varnish it. Got a couple threads stuck under there, but that's no problem. Those will come right up. And look at that. What a difference. Having that epoxy finish on there, that vinyl just grabs on there. Okay, same thing. You guys got the routine down now. I'm going to find my center here again. I'm going to mark it. Get rid of my extras I've got laying around. We're going to pull this over. Now, I will tell you guys, if you guys were leaving this sign inside, you would not necessarily have to do our next step with the epoxy, but this one is to hang outside. And so that is why we're going to do the next step, which is to put an epoxy finish on it. Okay, so I'm going to line that up. Perfect. Varnish it on. Okay. You guys got the steps down pretty easy once you've got it printed off of your Cricut, using contact paper for your transfer, and saving a little bit of money there. And we have got our sign. Now, like I said, you could be done with this right now if you want to leave this inside. I want to be able to have this be hanging outside. So the next step we're going to do is we are going to mix our epoxy again, okay, our A and our B. We're going to do a larger dose of it this time because we want a good, nice, even lay of it, and we're actually going to do all the sides. So because of that, I'm going to go grab some risers so we can lift this off. And then we will mix our epoxy, we'll pour it on, and then you guys, basically this project is going to be done. Of course, we need to wait 24 hours till it's not sticky and 72 hours for it to fully cure, but we're just about there. So give me a second. I'm going to get some risers to raise this up and get some cups to mix our epoxy, and we'll go on to our next step. Okay, so now we're ready for our epoxy. So remember, rule of thumb, anytime you guys are dealing with epoxy, make sure that you're putting your rubber gloves on. This stuff is sticky, so we want to make sure. Now, my workspace is still covered. Remember, we did that in the first step. And so, wow, at least I can't put on rubber gloves today. I really can't. This is crazy. So I have my surface still covered, so really important with that. Now, you want to make sure you've got equal amounts of your epoxy. Now, I buy these by the 2-quart size. You can definitely buy smaller increments of epoxy, and it'll pour out. But I'm going to go ahead, and I'm at the end of my epoxy, and so I'm actually going to pour as much as I can get out of part A. And then I am going to measure the same amount of part B. So I'm just going to let this drain out here. That's pretty good. Put that off to the side. And then what I'm going to do is on my part B, I'm going to get down here and make sure that I can get the same amount. Okay, and there we go. We've got our part A and our part B. Looks like it's time for Lisa to buy more epoxy. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to transfer it into a larger cup. Now, how fitting, welcome to your patio. What do we do? Sipping, grilling, and chilling, but to mix it in a red Solo cup. So I am going to pour part B into my red Solo cup, and I want to make sure I get out every bit. Now, you guys saw that I did not use a measure for this one. I literally eyeballed it using the clear cups. When I'm doing this much epoxy, it seems to work fine for me. The directions definitely say equal parts of both. So when I use a smaller amount of epoxy, I always use the measuring cups or the little cups that have a measure on it. But I don't normally do it when I'm doing my bigger projects. And I use the clear cups so that I can see level. If I get down to eye level, I can see that I've got the same amount. Now remember, you guys, you need to stir this for a good 2 minutes. And you notice that I'm trying to get everything out of that cup, okay? Now, what we want to do is we want to stir, and it's really not smart to be stirring over your project, but I want to be able to show you guys all this in the camera angle. So I'm going to stir this for 2 minutes. I'm going to fast forward through this so you guys do not need to see me sit here and stir, but I will tell you that you want to stir slow. We want to have the least amount of air bubbles as possible. And so if you stir a little bit slower, it has less air bubbles. What you're looking for is for this to be clear when you pull it up, and it's still a little milky. So I'm going to go ahead and keep stirring, and I'll join you right back when it's time for us to pour it on our design. Okay, so we've hit our 2 minutes, and now it might not be easy to see in the camera, but now this is really clear looking. I do have a few air bubbles, but we're going to be able to run a heat gun or a hairdryer over it to take care of those. So what we want to do now is we are going to pour this on. Now, one thing I want to do is I do want to center this over my paper because I want to make sure my whole area is covered, because this is going to drip down the edges. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pour this on. So I'm going to get everything I can out of my cup. Okay. And what I'm going to do is the same thing we did in the first step. I pick up these really inexpensive paintbrushes, and I am just going to use it to spread the epoxy around. And I want to get the center nice and covered, and then we'll push out towards the outside. Okay, these are throwaway paintbrushes. We're not going to use them again. Okay, but if you get what I find doing this, as long as you've got a good layer of epoxy on there, is it is going to just run its own course and flatten out. So I used to use the popsicle sticks and do this, but what I found is with the paintbrush, one, it's not quite as messy, and two, I just feel like I got a little bit more control with the paintbrush. You want to make sure that you're not losing your bristles on your paintbrush, that's for sure, but I just find when I was doing the popsicle stick, I would leave gaps in the area. Now, one thing you want to make sure is you don't have any little flyaways. I've been doing a lot of sewing in my craft room lately, so I swear I've got lots of little threads that are out and about. Okay, but I want to make sure that I got everything nice and covered. Now, on these edges, it's going to drip naturally down the edges, but right now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we give it a good paint with the paintbrush, a swipe with the paintbrush to get it started. Okay, then we're going to let this set, and I let it set for, I would say, about 15-20 minutes. And then what we're going to do is two things. One, we're going to come in with a heat gun, and I can see just around some of my words, and I'll try to zoom in for you guys so you maybe can see it a little bit better. A few of my words I am seeing air bubbles, and we're going to take care of all of those with the heat gun. If you don't have a heat gun, you can use your hairdryer. I am actually using a gun that I had when I did a lot of scrapbooking that is an embossing gun. So basically the same thing, it's just a heat gun. So I think sometimes I like to get down at eye level, and I'll tell you, using this paintbrush, you guys, really makes it a little bit easier. I really like this new technique I've been starting to do with the paintbrush. Again, it's the throwaway. I'm going to link for you guys which ones it is, so you guys will know which ones to use. But basically, we're going to let this sit. I'm going to join you back here in about 15 minutes. A lot faster on your guys' time because I'll just fast forward through it. But I'm going to come back, and then we're going to apply the air gun to this. So give me a few minutes, and we'll go on to our next step. Okay, you guys, we're back here. It's about 15 minutes, and I definitely have some air bubbles. I've got a pretty good size air bubble here, and I've got a few around my A and a few around these letters. So what I did is, like I told you guys, I am using my Crafter's Companion embossing heat gun. You can use a hairdryer or you can use a heat gun. You want to keep it on a low setting, you guys, and you literally just run it over and see those air bubbles pop. I'm not sure if you guys can see that in the camera, but so I am just very easily, not real close. I've got my distance. I'm just running this over. If you get too close, you guys, you can actually burn an impression, and then it dries and you can definitely see where you had the heat. So I just like to go over, especially where my words are, because that is where I can really see the air bubbles. But then I like to get down at eye level and just see if I see any other big areas with air bubbles. Now by doing this, it is going to move your epoxy a little bit. So see, I'm just going back and forth. And this is a really important step, you guys. It's going to help even out your epoxy and get rid of all those imperfections or those air bubbles. Okay, so now I think I'm looking pretty darn good. Got a couple more air bubbles there I might want to get rid of. Otherwise, this is looking beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my heat gun. One thing you guys might have noticed when you came back is I did take and put paper towels all the way around. Again, I am dripping. I can definitely see where my epoxy is dripping down, which I fully expected to have happen. And so again, just protecting that workspace and giving it just that extra layer that it can drip onto. Now the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab some more gloves, just because I'm going to touch that paintbrush we were just using. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently go around the edge. So right along this edge, and I know it's hard for you guys to see, but I do have some drippage. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take my finger and I'm just going to feel all the way around it. And that way I can kind of smooth out some of those drips. Okay, so if I just take my fingers and I can smooth those out so we don't have drips after the fact. Okay, so, and I just kind of rub those into the board, because one thing you can do, you don't have to do, but one thing that you can do is we could actually put a layer of epoxy on the back side too, to totally encase this sign. So the other thing I like to do at this point is just kind of take a glance around the edges and make sure that you've got epoxy on all of the edge. Okay, and again, that I had a little bit of a thread there that I picked up with my finger, and I'm just going to smooth those out like that. Now what I'm going to do over the next, say, hour is I'll keep an eye on this. Come back and check for air bubbles. In fact, you guys, I could just see some more air bubbles. This piece of wood had a nice size knot in it, and for some reason it is wanting to bubble up. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot it with my heat gun one more time, and it looks like I'm going to have to keep a close eye on that one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take off my gloves, grab my heat gun again, pop those one bubbles that are right there, and look, another one just popped up. As soon as I popped one, another one came up. So that's one I'm definitely going to have to keep an eye on the next hour. After about an hour, they normally don't bubble up too bad or have air bubbles. So this project is basically done. I will tell you guys what I like to do also is put some type of hanging bracket on the back of it when I give these as presents. Sometimes I've also drilled holes in them in the corners so they can be hung that way. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some little hanging brackets on the back. So I'll make sure I show you guys a picture of that. And next time I meet or show this to you guys, I'm going to show you the finished product. So thanks so much for joining me.
Here I wanted to show you an example of what I did to hang my sign. And I think it turned out just great. Thanks so much for joining me for another Inspiration Friday. I hope you like this project, making a wood sign with an epoxy finish. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. and click on the bell to be reminded whenever I upload a new video. If you have any questions, please add a comment below. And also, don't forget to check out my blog at funstuffcrafts.com for other DIY projects.